Hi, this is the Lovely Bones Case Study Group. I'm Chowmi Wan.
I'm Bree Hardy.
And I'm David Hurst.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So I will be discussing the Lovely Bones crisis synopsis. Susie Salmon's death on December 6th, 1973, at the age of 14 years old, is the precipitating event that led to the main crisis of the novel. On that day, it was dark and snowing as Susie was walking through the neighborhood to get back home. On her way home, she encountered her neighbor, Mr. Harvey, who asked her if she wanted to see the underground building he just finished constructing. Curious, she agreed to follow Mr. Harvey into the hole in the ground, which was roughly the size of a small room. There, in that small room in the ground, was where Mr. Harvey raped and killed her. Mr. Harvey destroyed the hole in the ground, covering the evidence that would lead him to the crime of murdering Susie Salmon. The Salmon family's perceived meaning of the crisis changes as the family receives news of Susie's disappearance. On the night that Susie was killed, her family initially thought that Susie was lost in the snow and notified the police about what she looked like in case they found her. The household believes that their loved one was alive out there in the cold and that she will eventually return home safe. A few days later, a detective visited the family to bring them the news that they were only able to find Susie's dismembered elbow and that they were still looking for her. Lindsay threw up at the news of her sister's missing limb, but the family still had a little bit of hope that Susie was still alive. The next time the detective visits the Salmons, he shows the family a pom-pom hat covered with Susie's saliva, and the family now understands that their loved one is dead. Everyone in the family, except for Buckley, becomes devastated at the news that Susie would never come back and starts to grieve in their own way. Next slide, please. So I will focus on each member of Susie's family regarding their ineffective problem solving and their debilitating state after the tragic event. I will start off with Abigail Salmon, who is Susie's mother. When she first heard of her daughter's death, she heavily cried and grieved for her. She tells her husband to stop trying to find Susie's killer, as she had complete faith that the police could handle it. After years suppressing her emotions, she couldn't handle it any longer, leading her to have an affair with Detective Len and leaving her family behind by moving to a different state. She could not bear being around her husband and their two children without thinking about Susie any longer. Susie's father, Jack Salmon, at the news of her daughter's death, broke down and started to destroy all the ships and bottles he and Susie made together. He started to grow an obsession with Susie by holding on to anything that belonged to her and journaling everything relating to Susie. Jack would write down any clues he could find connecting Mr. Harvey to Susie's death, as his instincts believed that his friendly neighbor was the culprit. He would constantly call the police station about any clues he discovered and ask them to keep interrogating Mr. Harvey. One night, years after the tragic death, he followed a light in the cornfield who he believed was Mr. Harvey, only to be met with two scared teenagers who broke his knee and fled the scene. Jack's obsession not only led him to get physically hurt, but also a little isolated from his living loved ones. Next slide, please. Regarding Lindsay, she decided to grieve for her older sister by ignoring help from her family and the community around her. She would act stone-faced, as if nothing major has happened, to ignore her never-ending thoughts and feelings about Susie. Personally, I find Lindsay to be handling Susie's death the best out of her whole family, as she had her boyfriend Samuel, who loved her unconditionally and helped her move on from Susie. He gave her a reason to love again, and he sees her more than just a dead girl's sister. Years later, both Lindsay and her father were able to open up a little more about their feelings regarding Susie and her murder and bonded over their shared feelings. Lastly, I want to discuss about Buckley Salmon, the youngest child of the family, who was only 4 years old at the time of Susie's passing and had no understanding of the concept of death. He is the only Salmon who had no ineffective problem-solving or functionally debilitating state. Next slide, please.
Thank you. It is important to note that the book does not thoroughly explore or describe sociocultural contexts, but The Lovely Bones allows readers to assume and imagine most of the sociocultural aspects of the book. Um, According to the textbook, crisis workers should work to understand their client's worldview and sociocultural context in which their client lives. So obviously, this is a very important factor in a crisis. So we know that Susie and her family are depicted as middle class. Um, we can assume that the family has stable income and financial security. The family is settled in a suburban neighborhood, which made the murder of Susie more shocking because some people assumed that this would guarantee a safer neighborhood. There's also a functioning school district in the area. It can be assumed that Susie was affected by the societal view and expectation of women in the 1970s. Traditional gender roles that were more popular during this time attempted to conform girls and women to be passive, agreeable, and to appear innocent, which made Susie's death more challenging and devastating. This societal expectation on women and girls may have possibly influenced Susie's decision to go into the underground hole with Mr. Harvey. Obviously, she was coerced and manipulated, but it's hard to decipher whether or not this would have helped her escape Mr. Harvey's plan. Um, so, although this presentation focuses on the book, the movie adaptation pictured Susie and her family to be white. This is further supported because the first suspect of the murder was Ray Singh, if I'm pronouncing that correct, due to racial profiling, which led to the unjust assumption that the boy with Indian heritage would be the first person that people suspected to kill Susie. Oh, okay.
I will present the proposed interventions. So, there was no crisis worker specifically mentioned in the book, which in turn reflects the family's lack of external support in coping with Susie's murder. This led to the family members' maladaptive coping behaviors, such as Jack's obsession with finding the killer and Abigail's emotional withdrawal. A crisis worker could have been able to help the family process their grief and trauma in a healthier, more constructive way, which could have potentially prevented some of the harmful behaviors they expressed. Family therapy is one intervention I would propose. A family therapist could have provided the Salmon family with a safe space to communicate more effectively and address unresolved emotions. Therapy could have helped them develop coping strategies and mitigate the negative impacts of unhealthy behaviors. This intervention could have encouraged more support between family members during their shared grief. Next slide, please. The next intervention I would propose is individual counseling for Jack and Abigail. Individual counseling would have offered a healthier way for Jack to process the loss of his daughter. Instead of fixating on finding Susie's killer, he could have learned a process such as boundary setting or effective communication to process his feelings in a less destructive way. He would have been able to confront his pain rather than channeling it into an obsessive pursuit. Abigail's avoidance of her grief resulted in her emotional detachment from the family. This therapeutic technique could have helped her understand her emotions, allowing her to grieve in a way that doesn't involve withdrawing from her loved ones. This could have also helped prevent the breaking of her relationship with Jack. I would propose grief counseling for Lindsay and Buckley. Lindsay took on adult responsibilities being the oldest child, which placed unwarranted burdens on her. Age-appropriate grief counseling could have provided her with emotional support, which would reduce the pressure she felt to protect her family and allow her to process her own grief. Buckley, being a young child, needed emotional validation. Counseling would have ensured that his feelings of confusion and abandonment were acknowledged, helping him feel heard and supported during this traumatic experience.
It would help if I unmuted myself. The Lovely Bones, in the Lovely Bones, the police department is notified that Susie has disappeared. Although there is no crisis hotline responder in the book, our role play will include a crisis hotline responder and Jack. And the skills that will be displayed in this role play include empathy, open-ended questions, breathing exercise, affirmation, reassurance, and allow catharsis. So whenever you are ready, Chowmi.
Mhm. Hello, my name is Chowmi Wan. You're speaking with Norristown Police Department. Who am I speaking with?
Hello, my name is Jack, and I would like to file a missing persons report.
Who is the missing person?
My daughter, Susie Salmon. She should have returned home by now. I know something is wrong. I can feel it. Susie is the type of girl who would never run away. She is a sweet young girl and is a good student. We have looked everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I've called friends, I've called neighbors, I've looked everywhere around our property. She's nowhere to be seen.
Can you describe what she was wearing and what she looks like?
Yes, she was wearing a pair of those yellow bell-bottom pants, a shirt, and a royal blue parka. I'm scared and I do not know what to do. It isn't like Susie to not come home after school.
How old is she? What about her height, hair color? Any other important traits we need to look out for?
She's 14 years old, a freshman in high school. I want to say she's about 5 feet and weighs around 100 pounds. Her hair is blonde. She cuts across the cornfield on her way home, if that helps. I believe we should look in that area as well.
Jack, can I put you on hold so I can send officers out to begin looking for her in the area?
Yes.
Okay, officers have been sent out to look for Susie. Jack, I can see how scared you are. It must be unbearable right now not knowing where Susie is. Let's just slow down for a second. Does that sound okay?
I do not know how to slow down. I need to find where my daughter is. Every second counts. I'm freaking out. There's a potential killer in the neighborhood. I do not want my mind to wander that way, but I can't help it. Susie is missing. She's gone. Who the hell could have done this? I do not know, nor have I ever met anyone in the neighborhood who I believe would do such a thing. Sure, maybe I've met a few weirdos around here, but someone crazy enough to take my daughter away from me? I can't do this. I can't. My hands are shaky and I feel like I'm actually going to explode. I'm at a complete loss.
I hear you, and I want to assure you that we are doing everything we can to find Susie. It is a good idea to focus on taking care of yourself so that you can think clearly and take the right next steps. I'm here with you. You are not alone in this. Your family is also here for you. Jack, let's do a breathing exercise together to help calm down and refocus. We're going to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for another 4 seconds, and then exhale slowly. Are you ready, Jack?
Sure.
All right, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now exhale. That's good, Jack. You've taken the right steps. You've reached out to people who might know where she is, and that is important.
But what if she's out there, scared, alone, and I can't reach her in time?
I know you are afraid, and it's a terrifying thought. This is the kind of crisis where we need professionals involved, police and search teams. They have the resources and experience to widen the search.
What if it's too late? And what if she's hurt and I was not there for her?
Jack, I recognize that you feel guilty, and I know it's hard not to feel responsible when something like this happens. Neither you nor I can predict or control everything. Right now, the best thing you can do is to stay focused on the next steps and be prepared for new updates as we continue the search.
I don't know how I let this happen. I do not know what to do. I failed her. Susie is missing and I failed her. How could I let this happen?
You are telling me that it feels that you are failing her, but you are not failing her, Jack. You're doing everything you can. We will take this step by step. The moment you start to feel like you're failing her, remember that you're right here, still in the fight and thinking of her. That is what matters. I am right here with you through all this, okay?
Thank you. I don't know if I can do this alone.
You don't have to. We'll get through this together.
And scene.
Okay, so I will talk about my feelings of the novel, how it was informative, and who I identified with the most. So, my overall feelings of the novel are incredibly mixed. The first few chapters of the novel about how Susie was killed and the family and community's reaction to her death were heartbreaking, as it led me to tears multiple times. I flipped the next page, constantly wondering if the family was ever going to recover and if the police were going to catch Mr. Harvey. I was immersed in the book for several chapters. However, towards the end of the novel, I started to have many issues with the writing. The later half of the novel left me uncomfortable and disappointed as the author breaks her own heaven principles to have Susie and Ray interact in inappropriate ways with each other, as well as how the author handled Mr. Harvey's death. I personally will not delve into what happened between Susie and older Ray, but I will emphasize a bit that the author wrote Mr. Harvey's ending as him going to kill another young girl victim, only to die by an icicle. It is an incredibly unsatisfactory ending that after all his crimes, he dies from just a piece of ice. No justice was served for any of Mr. Harvey's victims. Even with my mixed feelings of the overall novel, I will give the author props for helping me understand that everyone reacts to death and grieves differently, even if they all experience the same traumatic event. Everyone has different ways to cope with loss, as some people can learn from the experience and grow into stronger individuals, whereas others continue to ignore everything connected to the event, never daring to think about it again. Seeing how each of Susie's family members reacted to her death helped me understand this message. Although I have not experienced the loss of a loved one yet, I can still relate to and understand how Abigail and Jack handled their oldest daughter's death. Again, as I said, I didn't experience the loss of a loved one, but I did lose my old identity in life when I first moved to Kentucky. The life I had, the friends I made, and my childhood home that I lived for 13 years of my life were all stripped away from me when I was forced to move to Kentucky. For the first few months living in Kentucky, I started to become a bit obsessed with the idea of running away and reclaiming the life I had back in North Carolina. I kept thinking to myself, my friends that I had to leave behind, and how much better my life could have been if I just didn't move away. My initial constant desire to run away and the obsession I had with North Carolina made me understand and relate to how Susie's parents handled their loss of Susie. I honestly didn't think I would relate to them this much if I hadn't dedicated time to think about it. Next slide, please.
Me, it evoked personal feelings from me from my own experience. Okay. This book was emotional for me. It evoked personal feelings from me from my own experience with grief and loss. I felt that Susie's perspective was fascinating because it shows great remorse not only for She not only shows great remorse for herself, but for the people she had to leave behind. The most frustrating aspect of the book for me was the fact that Mr. Harvey was never caught. Naturally, I found myself frustrated with other characters like Abigail and Lynn, but I appreciate that the book showed the maladaptive sides of grief, which is what Chow covered. For Abigail, she coped through the loss of her daughter by abandoning her family. It was informative seeing the rough aspect of grief and the ways various people react to loss, such as isolation, abandonment, and paranoia. I relate the most to Jack and Susie. Um, don't know if that's entirely a good thing. First, I think that I would react similarly to Jack. Jack became obsessive and isolated when reacting to Susie's disappearance. Secondly, I relate to Susie because she was worried about her family's ability to heal from her loss. I feel like if I was in the story, these characters are more relatable, and I see myself in both of them.
I felt a deep sadness and frustration with Susie's death and her family's struggle to cope. Susie's longing to reconnect with her family from the afterlife resonated with me, as did Jack's obsessive search for justice. Abigail's emotional detachment reminded me of my own tendency to withdraw after losing a family member earlier this year. Susie's perspective from the afterlife was one of the most compelling parts to me. It gave a unique look at grief and healing from a point of view that we aren't able to see in real life. The late victim. Lindsay's resilience and ability to take on adult responsibilities was very insightful, showing how different people cope during a crisis. Her bravery to seek justice and ability to somewhat hold the family together was especially moving. I think I identified most with Abigail. Her emotional detachment reflected my initial reaction to my own grief, making her struggles feel somewhat relatable.
And then here is our references, and that is the end of our presentation. Thank you.